Most producers who try to make their own samples tend to only think in chords and melodies. But the truth is, what really makes a sample timeless is the textures. Not just the obvious things like tape sounds and vinyl crackle, but also the specific sounds that you might use. How you bring all of those things together is what really gives a sample character and makes it sound like you got it off of an old dusty record. And that's exactly the approach that I took here. Building layers that feel cinematic and emotional while also leaving space for the producer to be able to flip. So let me show you how I built it. Quick note, the sample's from my new pack, Sepia Dreams. It has 10 cinematic compositions inspired by foreign film scores. I'll drop a link in the description if you want to check it out. So I'm going to start off with the A section for this sample, and the first instrument that I used was a flute. And for that sound, I went with the flute from Project Sam's Lumina. Next up, I wanted to back up the melody line that the flute is playing, so I added this vocal sound. And for that, I went with this contact library called Shebonai. So this vocal line is not just one of the sounds that I decided to use for melody purposes, but also for texture. So if we look at the effects, I have some basic EQ going here, and then I have the La compressor from Analog Obsession, and I'm really just using it to tame some of the peaks in the vocal. But then to add some texture, I ran it through an instance of RC20, and I have some of the vinyl noise still on. And then the last thing that I'm doing to bring out a little bit more texture and make it a little bit more ethereal is I'm routing the vocal to a reverb bus. Next up, I added a piano. So as you can see, I'm not really starting off the piano playing anything too complicated. It's really just a combination of minor ninth chords and minor sevenths with a 6th and I believe a 13th added. Which I know if you don't understand music theory sounds a little bit more complicated, but I promise it's really not. And for this piano, I went with addictive keys. Next up, I have an instrument called the vibraphone. In this section of the sample, I'm really just using it as a way to back up the piano. And for this sound, I actually went with an old Sampletron library from IK Multimedia, and I added this tremolo effect in order to get it to sound so wavy, which is also what kind of helps to add more texture to the sample without having to use more sound effects, or rather non-melodic sound effects. Next up, I have my trusty dusty bass. And for that, I just went with the Scarby Rickenbacker bass. And then the last thing that I did here to round out the A section is I just added a hi-hat. And for that, I went with the vintage dry bank from Addictive Drums 2. And then because this bank had some extra reverb and room noise on it that I didn't necessarily want, I decided to add the drum shaper, and I just brought down the sustain a little bit in order to take off some of the tail end off of the hi-hats. All right, so now we move on to the B section. Here, I decided to drop out the vocals and the flute, and then I added in some violins. And for those violins, I went with LA Scoring Strings, which to this day is still my favorite string library for Kontakt. Mainly because it's so easy to get that bendy glissando sound when you're playing your strings in legato. And then the other thing that I'm doing here in order to get the strings to sound a little bit more dynamic is I'm using modulation. It just helps the strings to sound more dynamic because as you bring the mod wheel up, it makes the strings get louder and vice versa when you bring the mod wheel down. Then I decided I wanted to do a little bit more with the piano in the B section. So here's what that sounds like. So yeah, it's just introducing a new feel and kind of taking you more on an audio journey throughout the sample rather than just having it be the same loop for, 8 to 16 to 24 bars. Then I also changed up what I'm doing with the vibraphone. And then now we finally move on to the C section. I kind of mixed and matched some of the elements from the A and the B section, and then I took a couple of instruments away, and then I added a couple more. So let me show you what I mean. The piano goes back to being exactly the same as it was in the A section. But then for the vibraphone, I mixed and matched what I played in both the A sections and the B section. And then from there, to tie everything together, I decided I kind of wanted to bring back the melody from the very beginning of the sample, but instead of bringing back the same instruments, I have two new instruments playing it. So the first instrument that I brought back is actually a celeste. And for that sound, I went with the old Miroslav Philharmonic from IK Multimedia. And then I decided to back that up and add some vocals, but instead of going with the same vocals that I had in the beginning of the sample, this time I went with the choir. For this, I went with the Kontakt library called Voxos. So now that I showed you the sample making process, let me see if I can go ahead and show you how you can make a beat with that same sample. First, I'm gonna listen to it and see what parts I want to chop up. I think I'm starting to get a little idea. To be clear, I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing right now, so I'm just kind of going with it as I go along. So I feel like this is probably the section that I would end up using for the hook. So let me start adding some drums now. I think I'm gonna use all drums from my new drum kit called Dust. And then to make the drums feel a little bit more natural, I'm gonna go ahead and vary the velocities a little bit. So every time I have a boom for the kick, I'm gonna bring down the velocity on the first hit. So that's a pretty decent skeleton for the hook. Now I'm gonna see if I can come up with a verse. So now I'm just gonna break down the beat into all of its different elements and see what I need to add and sequence out as I go along. So if you can master textures, imperfections, and those film reel style instruments, then you can create your own vintage samples. But here's the thing, making your own dope samples is only half the battle. The other half is knowing how to get your music to the right people. So watch this video right here to learn what steps to take no matter what level you're at in your music producer career.